As many of you know, I moved back to Vancouver in July of this year of 2024. And I lived here about 8 years ago, and I'd spent a couple of years in the early time of my career. And when I was transitioning from being a bus driver into a writer. And there was a real interesting scene in the city at the time that I was fully unaware of. And one of the people that was part of that is my next guest for a conversation. And his name is Brandon. And I guess we've known each other now 11 years, would you say, Brandon?
That sounds right.
So, Brandon is a person that I've known. We've spent some time together, especially when I was living here. And I have some funny stories, and I'm sure he remembers them, of literally waking up at 2 in the morning and he's sitting on my sofa with my now wife, having conversations about movies and eating pita pizzas. If you do remember that, maybe you
Oh yeah,
don't.
no, I remember trying to scour all of the pizzas out of your home I could possibly get. Regret nothing.
Exactly. So he was very much a part of my early life here in Vancouver, and I remember him very fondly. Brandon is a extremely comedic, but a man of the heart as well, and always open, always vulnerable, and I would say one of the more insightful people I know about life. And I think the journey that he's been on over the last 10 years has been an incredible one, and one that I'm proud of, and I'm really excited to talk to him today. Brandon, I want to start with a quote, and I want to get your feeling on it, and then we'll dive in. So here's the quote: "We all have different desires and needs, but if we don't discover what we want from ourselves and what we stand for, we will live passively and unfulfilled." Do you know who that quote is from?
I don't. It's a nice one.
That's Bill Watterson
Oh,
of
Calvin
Calvin
and
and
Hobbes.
Hobbes fame.
Nice.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah. No, I like it. It invites you to kind of plumb the depths of who you are to figure out where you're going. I immediately thought of there's a comics museum in Ohio that has a bunch of Calvin and Hobbes all behind like a in some kind of bank vault, and it's interesting how warm and connective his work is, and then to think of like this, like it being held in like this, cold in this cold room behind bulletproof walls.
Why is that? Do you know what the story is there?
I mean, I'm probably selling it worse than it is. It's the Billy Ireland Museum, which is like I think he donated all of the pages there because they have a fantastic uh, comic book collection, kind of based off of like Milton Caniff's work there, and Jeff Smith coming from the same place.
Interesting. What do you, when it comes to your own life, do you have any ideas or thoughts that come up while I was reading it?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I feel like you mentioned before, I think the past decade of my life has been very exploratory. I had a very clear vision of who I was growing up and kind of my direction and everything. And I think that hitting a snag in my career and also just hitting middle age really put me in a position where I had to actually figure out what I am and to remove myself from just what I do,
Hmm.
which I think that it's something that you know we all kind of shorthand versions of how we think of ourselves. And you think of yourself as an artist. When I worked at a bar in New York in the early 2000s, and I remember at the time being like, I'm gonna try to distance myself from just being a comic artist, and because I feel like I was someone that was a little obnoxious about it when I was younger. I was like, would meet people and want to immediately show them my work, and almost be like, look, I have value because I draw these pictures. And in my mid 20s, I made an attempt at a bar to be like, I'm just gonna not talk to people about art and try to exist on another level. And I couldn't do it then. And only in my 40s have I hit a point. And it really required me to be in a community that didn't wasn't interested in comics, and I just wasn't around the same kind of people. And suddenly I'm like, oh, I have to figure out how to swim in the deep end of socialization.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit before we started recording about that idea that often you've worked in isolation. And I think a lot of people in the same space as you creatively or in their career operate like that. So I guess what was that transition for you when you were thrown in the deep end? What were some of the realizations you had in that transition?
Uh, I mean, a lot of it was kind of realizing that I had a different, and this is kind of an ongoing struggle, is realizing I had a different idea of myself and how I relate to other people. I'd set up this, I'd set up this life where um, I was essentially, cloistered off in my own environment, and then if I were to go out for something, it would usually be like I'd be invited and I'd be on a guest list or something. Um, but I was always used to kind of having this like advantage over the rest of humanity around me. And then to be in an environment where I didn't have that, it kind of made me realize like, oh, it's kind of nice to not to. There's a thing in my diary comic that I put out recently that I talk about how it's kind of nice to not be very to not matter, and it sounds like a bummer, but the reality is like it's nice to just realize that like we're all just people and you can walk out in the desert and throw some rocks and it doesn't have to be something that you blog about you know
It's, yeah, this is weirdly a conversation that I've been having a lot, which is this idea that I don't know if it's the modern media age, but how our identity is almost inseparable from the art that we make. And actually, in some cases, our identity as celebrity leads before the art.
yeah.
And I was talking with actually a listener of the show, and he was saying how only in those scenarios do you kind of put yourself at risk. Where if you put the art first, then the art is at risk. But if you are ahead of it, then you're the one that's at risk. What does that mean? Anything to you?
I'm trying to parse it out like basically like you put yourself at risk if you're letting be like I have an idea I want to express. Is that riskier than like I'm a person who wants to hold up this image because they both seem like intensely risky but
Yeah.
also things that I don't have the foresight to not do.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's just come up, and I think especially in the I guess in the age that we live with, public personas, and it's this kind of weird shift in celebrity. Nobody even 20 years ago people loved celebrities. Now nobody wants anything to do with them. I just think it's interesting, and I don't know. I don't even fully understand it, or even have a real perspective. I just think it's interesting that celebrity has become vulnerability. I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird because there's I mean something I've been aware of more lately is the idea of like it's funny when you know someone like interacting with someone famous who other people no one around them has any idea who they are is fascinating.
Hmm.
I have a friend who does like video game review stuff on YouTube, and she's like, in her world, she's very important and does all this stuff all the time. And I've never met someone who has any idea who she is, and it's always really fascinating to me because I'm like, comics is so much smaller than video games, and if I don't like seek out the tiny sliver of humanity that reads what I do, it's like you can essentially be anonymous. But then the income comes off of people that are like have a connection to what you do and you as a person and pay you and it's a weird position that we've decided to put ourselves in.
If you could do it over again, would you do something else?
uh no, I mean I really like doing what I do for a living. Like I really like making art. um, I think I would handle things differently. I think that i I didn't really, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of aspects of life that I feel like I didn't, wasn't kind of properly prepared to go into. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's I think the human condition.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the thing. It's been nice to be in. I've been in less of a regret headspace lately because for
Mm.
years I went through a big cancel thing, and for years it was like this. what could I possibly do to reverse this situation? And I think I can realistically say that it's like I can't imagine not, like, I feel better having to gone through some shitty years, that I am more aware that I can handle things that I wasn't aware of before.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Sure.
Definitely. I think I want to talk about that. It'd be interesting. I'm going to try something here live because we've been talking a little bit already, but I introduced you as the person that I know. How would you introduce yourself? I haven't asked a guest that yet. How would you introduce yourself?
I have the cheap I have the cheap and easy versions of
Yeah.
how I have ways to introduce myself to strangers that are sometimes like leave me alone ways to introduce myself. I've realized. I lived in Los Angeles for the past year before moving back to Las Vegas, and I would tell people I made comic books to distance myself from them, because it essentially to me was saying, I can't help your career. I have nothing for you, and it worked. Um,
Amazing.
but I think that's something I'm struggling with, because it's always been like I'm Brandon. I make comic books, and I'm feeling more and more like uh, that's not enough in a life to just be like you ever see the Batman cartoon like that, like, because then it comes with this caveat of like, oh no, it's not like that, and you have to explain the other details of it, and it's just like, but it also sounds pretentious to, I don't want to view everything as I'm an artist either, because I feel like there's a little bit of I've been reading the Lemony Snicket's books to my partner when we go to sleep at night. She's in her 30s. It's appropriate. They're really fun. Just to have like this like kind of chill thing in the night, and it has all the adults in the books are really are horrible, and they're all relatable. And there's one who's the vice principal of this horrible school they're at, and he sees himself as a violinist and a genius. And if like someone comes in to deal with him with school problems, he's like, "You're supposed to applaud when you see a genius. I don't have time to deal with my job. I have to practice on being a genius violin player." And I feel like I've felt like that kind of person before. Like, and something I've gotten a lot of listening to this podcast you've been doing is you have this way of dismantling your ego that's really caused me to struggle with things, because you talk about like situations where you're like coming to terms with, I was going in there very self-important, and being like, how could I approach the situation differently, and not be expecting everyone to treat me like a genius when I walk in the room.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the ways that made me realize it is that, especially going into situations as a freelancer, nobody thinks or even knows who I am, so it makes it quite easy.
Yeah.
They don't. I'm just a stranger to them. They don't know me any better than the other person in the room, and I think just taking stock of that is that idea of putting yourself in that other person's shoes. We hired this guy to help us, and he's just being a jerk. why,
Right, but then
why would we want him there?
there's the flip side of that idea, where I do believe that there's people who have basically egoed themselves into making better art and a better, well, a more interesting position in life. Like, I do think that there's elements of like, like a Kanye West, where he's like, his bravado has made it possible for him to get to the place he's at now.
Yeah, but it's
Very
funny.
real,
It doesn't come without a cost, though.
Yeah, no, I
I
mean,
mean,
he seems he's from a very far distance. We don't talk anymore, but it seems like he's less happy these days than somebody who has all that, who has everything he's earned.
yeah, my position on that is definitely driven by, I don't know, machismo or ego or whatever. It's a star that burns bright and fast, but
Yeah,
it
yeah, or
it's
even, I
not
mean,
something that endures. When it comes to legacy and stuff like that.
it's typical because
Probably
Picasso
he'll.
was that type too.
Yeah, Yeah, exactly.
Not to talk over you, but
No, go ahead.
just it is it's a weird. It's like how it's like yes, you can achieve this like level of greatness with people that don't know you, but I think the trade off with being an ego monster is no one will like you just get sycophants hanging out with you. You know,
Mm.
I struggle a lot with the idea of like an uncaring universe,
Mm.
um, and just I don't know. But there's positives and negatives in that too, and and I have gotten a lot out of like doing drugs in the last decade, like things like mushrooms and weed. Um, I'm always saying I'm too old to. I'm I cannot try cocaine in my 40s. You know, that ship has sailed. So, but things like mushrooms and weed are things that have like that I've benefited from. And
Mm.
it is, I think, going into it with intent is really important. Like, I try not to smoke pot with just the idea of just like doing nothing. I've actually been like writing down my brain change because it feels
Mm.
as like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. My interests are different, and I like I've been trying to train myself to draw stoned because I grew up with so many people that like that was their favorite thing to do, and I've had friends that just love getting stoned and drawing pages, and I actually struggle with the idea of drawing sober. And for me, it's like not even it never occurs to me to draw stoned.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine trying to write in that mind space.
Right, or
But
like mushroom.
actually, I was going to ask you a little bit about. We've known each other a while, but I know a little bit about where you grew up. But I'd be really interested to hear about your early life. You know, when you were 10 or up to a teenager. Where did you grow up, and what was your life like in the early days?
Sure. I was raised by my mom in Oregon and Seattle mostly, and we were in low income housing a lot. Just her and me and my older brother Keith, and she was training to be a nurse for a lot of my childhood. She went to nursing school twice, and then eventually got it. And yeah, I had to. I felt like I had a pretty boring childhood. Um, both of my parents, my father lives in Central Oregon. He's like kind of a hippie in a geodesic dome that he built out of lava rock. Um, and calls me every day to tell me about airplanes these days. But um, so yeah, so my parents are divorced, and I lived with my mom and my brother, and I had a pretty boring childhood, but I had access to a lot of like science fiction and fantasy stuff. My mom writes kind of Christian science fiction and Christian fantasy uh, as a hobby.
Okay,
Um,
I didn't
and
know that.
yeah, it's so that was really cool, just being in an environment where the stuff was around a lot. Like I always had, like, and my older brother is an artist as well, and um, he discovered a lot of stuff that was really formative to me. Like he brought French comics home and Japanese comics and a bunch of things that I really latched onto. And he moved on. Like he works at an art gallery in San Francisco, and it's like, you know, he's got a classic snob life, and I'm still obsessed with like the comic books that he read at 14 and was like, these aren't cool anymore. And I'm like, I'll take that. That's mine forever. I'm sitting here talking to you wearing a Tintin shirt now.
Yeah,
It's like,
I wasn't gonna say anything.
yeah. um, so yeah, I think that, and I didn't do very well in school and ended up uh, getting put in a. I guess the shorthand version is I kind of didn't finish school, but I ended up in an alternative school that was full of a bunch of kids that got in trouble for a while, and that was really formative, I think, in a
Did
positive way.
you did you have sort of I was gonna ask you in those years, did you have sort of a mentor that you looked up to? You said your father wasn't really around. Was there someone in your life that you gravitated towards as a mentor or role model?
I think my older brother was a really big deal to me when I was, especially in those years, because he's 2 years older, and that was a huge gap, and I felt like I was really trying to emulate a lot of the things he was doing. Like there's things that I latched onto. Like there's things that even now, like the British show The Avengers, the Emma Peel.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he was really into that, and so I have just decided that that is like the most subversive, highest art. And then I go back and I watch it, and I'm like, it's like the Batman show, but they're spies, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But because I had such a high regard for my older brother, I was I was really latching on a lot, and a bunch of stuff I've had to kind of like because he was really into like stuff like Andy Warhol when we were kids and Keith Haring and stuff like that. And I don't like Keith Haring I still like, but Andy Warhol I don't particularly have much interest in these days. Yeah,
Mm.
so some things I've kind of like shuffled out myself. But yeah, no, I think that I didn't have a lot of that, and then I had these abstract ideas of comic book people that I looked up to.
Like the creators that you admired, but you didn't know much about them.
Yeah, exactly. And it was very, very different in the '80s. You'd read like 3 interviews with someone, and that would be your entire opinion of them.
We should get back to that.
I think it's healthy.
Yeah, this is a conversation I actually have a lot with a lot of creatives, especially now that I feel that I'm transitioning into the next phase of what I want to do with creativity and leadership. What is that? There's a bit of, well, actually, Bill Watterson, notoriously a recluse, right?
Yeah, but it's funny. It's more just like he's notoriously a recluse, but it's just like we don't know his life. He might be like exceptionally social and just
True.
not want to. And that's a weird thing about it too. Is like getting to know people who are. This is kind of another aside. Is it's weird when you get to know people whose entire persona and identity is putting themselves out to the world, because I've known several people at this point that are famous and have no friends. I don't think it's
Yeah.
rare. I think it's like a trade-off of like, do you want to like spend all your time editing YouTube videos of yourself and interacting with fans? And it's at this point. I mean, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. I have friends that are like professionally hot, and they have a hard time dating. And it makes in the abstract it's insane, but in the reality of like you don't know how to interact with people. You just know how to like make videos. It makes sense.
Do you think it's possible to have both genuine, intimate relationships, whether it's romantic or just friendships, but also have that style of life? Do you think you can balance those, or are they polar opposites?
I think there's ways to do it, but I mean I think there's always going to be a trade-off, because like it's not a good character trait to want attention from strangers, but you kind of need that on some
Mm.
level. I mean, it's strange because you have authors, Watterson or J.D. Salinger or whoever, that will just like you get the work, you don't get the person.
Hmm.
And I think there's value in that, but you're also creating this like relationship with people where it's just like I'm not going to engage with you on any level past this, which is fair, but also seems kind of strange because it's weird to I've had periods where I've really withdrawn from people, and I don't it's weird to I'll work on something for 2 years and then put it out and not know if anyone read it. You know,
Hmm.
that's always a weird position to put yourself in.
Yeah. Again, this comes up to, I think it's just the idea of questioning why we're just at that age, I think, where we're starting to question what has been my intent and what do I get out of it and what do I want out of it in the future. I mean, I'm still trying to figure that out myself. There's a part of me that, because I think art is more meaningful than ever, because we've kind of lived in a stagnant age the last decade, I want to celebrate it in a way that feels almost, like a rock show. Do a really great, launch party and the celebrity of it. But at the same time, I also want the art to speak for itself. So I don't know. I don't have any answers. It's just, I think we live in an interesting time around this, about exploring what it means to ourselves and also to the culture in general.
Yeah, and also our options are limited by things like having to make a living. Like that really changes everything. Because for me, it's like I can only. Yeah, I had a thing recently. I did a cover that I got a bunch of notes on from friends of mine to fix the drawing, and I went back and I'll shorten this story. I went back and did a a second version of the cover, and then showed it to some people, and one of the guys was like, "It's almost there. It's looking so much better, but just a little bit nudge from the other one." And my very callous uh, kind of having to live off of art thing was like, "No, this is already I've already built for this. The amount of hours I can put into this have now changed." And that's something I want to touch on too, because you did a really good episode previously about you and Owen talking about the idea of not doing things at 100% all the time.
Yeah, yeah, please.
Uh, and I understand the want to approach everything at 100%, but I don't think that's a realistic way to live a life, because different areas of your life require different attention. Like, if I was thinking about it in relation to, like, if you went in and got a cup of coffee and talked to that person like it was your friend you hadn't seen in 20 years, that's not what that person wants. You know, they're just like, buy the coffee and please leave me an extra dollar and get out of here. And so and maybe that's an odd choice of it, but it just in art, you have to choose your battles.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I landed. I think what you're touching on is what I was kind of battling with in the recent episode, where the value is, know where it's wanted, essentially. Like you said, the coffee shop owner doesn't want that, so it's not worth that investment of time. I think that's really critical, but that requires a level of self-awareness, and I think also you have to be honest with yourself. We talked just before about me going into a room and being arrogant. Hey, I'm so good at this, but if they don't understand the value of it, then why put it in? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's kind of all
really,
those things combined.
very much. It's really hard to be honest with yourself and to have any concept of how other people see you.
Yeah. Yes. And you're always continually surprised. I'm sure in your relationship, it's probably the same. I mean, I have a great relationship, but there's, of course, always tensions here and there. And then when my wife will sometimes say, "You're doing this, you're acting like this," and I get offended because it insinuates a kind of person that I am.
Yeah,
It's like, where did that come from? But it's a reality in a perspective, which is, if you can just sit in it the moment and just think about where that comes from, you can go, "Oh yeah, there's some truth there." Which is, that to me is baffling. It gets metaphysical at that point, but
yeah, and the idea of battling the type of person, accepting the type of person that you actually are, and hopefully leading towards becoming the type of person you want to be, and even having an idea of there's a there's a comic called Poison Elves that I think about a lot. Um, is It's like a heavy metal elf comic. I have a picture, a framed or a signed print of it on my side of my desk here. But um, the author died pretty young, but he did this issue of it I think about a lot, where he goes inside of his own brain because a, a soul hunting assassin has gone in there, and inside of his body he has a thing called his golden cord, and when he grabs that, he's able to become the absolute best version of himself, and he's this like glowing god version of himself.
oh,
And it's funny because it's couched in this like silly heavy metal elf comic, but it's so like I love that idea that they're inside of you as this idealized perfect version of yourself that you can tap into.
oh yeah, I actually, I really believe that. I do. And I think our pride gets in the way of that. It's always something I battle with, but I definitely notice the more I remind myself daily to serve people, the happier I am, the more joyful I am. But it's a real. There's a story you tell in your head that I think is the voice of pride that basically says you have to give up almost as a loss in
Right.
order to do that. But then the reality is, oh, it's actually more fulfilling. It's a weird battle.
Yeah, and there's the thing something I struggle with sometimes is I used to I used to be very jokey when interacting with people, and it wasn't for their benefit. I was just entertaining myself.
Right.
and coming to terms with the idea of like maybe it makes you more pleasant to be around if you're having less fun with people.
Well, okay. Well, actually, here's a question about that. Do you think that was you being authentic, or was that you in your heart trolling a little bit to get a rise out of people, or were you just authentically trying to lighten the mood?
I think it was a mix, honestly, because I think something that's kind of one of my approaches to life has always been this, like, especially when I was younger, was this idea of like how weird that I am experiencing this thing I've heard about all the time. You know, you like, you know, go for a job and become a bartender, and you're like, this is weird. I never thought of myself as a bartender. Like now I'm going to be a bartender. What funny things would a bartender say? You know, it's just, and just kind of going through life like that, and and finding the humor in things. But I think that the problem with that is sometimes I was doing it without including other people because I was like, what a weird situation. I would play games a lot. Like, I always think about there was a comic convention that I was at with my friend Joe, and we decided at this convention we had two games we were playing. One of them was we were going to get as many free breakfasts as we could possibly get and cut out all of the pretense that we weren't going to there for free breakfast, because there's always this thing of like editors being like, let's get lunch and let's talk these things over, and we would say like, if you pay for our breakfast we'll come along with you and we will pretend to pitch you ideas, but we're there for the breakfast. And we thought that that was hilarious. And the other thing is, we're playing a game to see how quickly after meeting someone we could say, at this point I think we can call each other friends. And I managed to, on stage, while talking over a thing, saying that to someone, or I might have said it to Joe, but I said it to someone immediately after meeting them on stage. And I got Joe, who was also on stage, to fall out of his chair laughing, and I regard that as a huge success. But there's these things, like there's an artist that me and Joe met, and it was my only time ever meeting him. He's an artist I have a lot of respect for, and we walked from a restaurant to a hotel with me and Joe, telling him the entire time, like, stick with us, we know how to get all the free breakfast here. And then I think back at that, and it was probably fine, but I'm like, did that guy just think that we were just idiots? Because we were like so in this, like, we're having fun and doing the side thing. And my hope at this point in my life is that I can do things like that, but never at the expense of others.
I like that. Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you talked about how you, for instance, with the bartending job, how you conceptualized it. I think in that statement, I understand why you're an artist. That you looked at it almost as an outsider, looking at the perspective of somebody. I mean, it is, I think, in its origin, a bit of empathy, but I think art also requires perspective. You're looking at something through, your particular lens, and I mean, I think that's evident in your work, especially your comics, your diary comics, which I think have been, I love them. I mean, they're my favorite thing that you've done. And okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about. I think this is a good transition point. Obviously, you were into art from a young age, and then you pursued that through your adult life. When you were kind of in your 30s, what was that era like, and did you have a sense of, we're building towards, I think, ultimately what I would like to talk about, which is the last decade, but I want to understand your perspective leading up before what was ultimately a pretty hard time for you.
Sure.
Leading up to that, I knew you in Vancouver. You were doing comics then. You were married, I believe,
Oh yeah.
and you were living in the city here. What was your life like then, and what were you? Do you have an idea of what was giving you this sort of driver, the meaning behind it, or were you still searching at that time? Do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, the time that I knew you was a weird time for me because I felt like I had been struggling my entire life to make it in comics, and I'd just gotten attention, and was like, at the time I felt like I'm really lucky that it wasn't until in my 30s that I really started getting attention and everything. But I I don't think that attention's particularly good at anyone at any age sometimes with that
Hmm.
level, because for me it was a very minor level of fame. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, but for me it felt like almost untenable how much attention I was getting from the outside world, because I was really used to no one caring about me, and then suddenly I was like in this position where I felt like the comics industry was like, oh, we better get Brandon's opinion on this, which is silly in retrospect. But it did feel like I was suddenly let in, and then I was having a lot of fun with it. I had a bunch of and I was way too into myself in those days. Like I was googling myself, and I would like go to. I had a coffee shop where I would take people for meetings, and then I had a secret coffee shop where I'd go to be alone. And I remember seeing things like there'd be like a 4chan thread about like how somebody had ran at me in the coffee shop, and they were like telling their theories about me and everything. And like an asshole, I was reading all this stuff. So I think I was in this really self-centered, enjoying being self-centered and enjoying all the attention I was getting, and possibly surrounded by sycophants, kind of very minor celebrity.
Yeah, well, that was the time that I met you, and I came pretty much from outside comics, even though I was in it. So I think I met you just as Brandon. I don't I don't remember having any particular airs about your work or anything like that, to be completely honest.
Yeah,
So
and I remember one of the things that I was fun about interacting with you is you liked comics, but me and your wife would always joke with you about how you kind of like pretended to be like, I don't even read this stuff. And then she'd be like, you have a stash of books over there.
yeah, I mean, it was, what I really realized, and this is also what I've noticed about you, and maybe you haven't. I really liked the community. I liked just hanging out with people that were driven, that were collaborative, that were making stuff, and there was a real excitement and energy. I remember there being so many just cool get-togethers, and getting together at 1 in the morning and wandering the city, or going for long walks, and just talking about life. There was like a real excitement, and that's what I really liked. And I think,
Yeah, that's accurate.
despite what you're saying too, that you were surrounded by sycophants, I mean, maybe, but I think I'm going to call out, I think your desire was, you were really trying to also raise up a lot of people you saw as talented and thought should have a shot.
Yeah, no, that was the attempt. And I am sounding more cynical about it than the reality of the time, because now I look back at a lot of aspects of that, and there is a bit of focusing on the negative, because as soon as you kind of are like, well, we had fun in community, it's like, yeah, that's entirely true. And I think it's one of those things where the people I would call sycophants stand out, because I'm like, if I traveled back in time, I'd be like, get those people out of your life as quick as possible. But there's obviously a ton of people, you included, that I still know from them that I have very warm feelings about. And in general, I do think it was a really good scene and community, um, and really allowed for a lot of cool things to go on. I think that just I think that some of my cynicism comes from how badly the comics community handled social pressure, which we can get to talking about.
Well, yeah, that's why I started this, right?
Yeah,
That's the whole, what happened with Ed Pisker, one of the members of this. I don't even like to use the word community, because I think until we rebuild it, it doesn't exist. That kind of led me to this, and then I think we can talk about a little bit what happened to you as well. You went through something quite similar, and I agree. I think what happened to you has probably tainted how you view the past, and maybe even I guess my worry has been, you are someone that really wanted to foster new talent, and you had a real, I think you did have a heart for that, and especially in this age where mentorship is dead. Obviously, we know why it's dead.
sure.
It, to me, it's a sadness that I think you had a real eye for talent. I think you still do, and your heart was to help those people and to raise them up, to see them go on, and you would have been a person that would have been happy if they did even better than you, right?
Yeah, yeah, very much. And a lot did. Like I always think about like James Stokoe is somebody who was really like I met him when he was a teenager, and he's like, you know, became such his own artist in so many cool ways. So I always think of him as like, I have a bunch of friends like that I regard as going places that I never expected them to, that I'm really proud of. But yeah, it's weird. I don't, and, and I've pulled back a lot from comics, but also I'm not completely removed from it these days. Yeah, it is hard to look back and take the good and the bad, because yeah, it's something that happens when, which I'm sure you experience, something that happens when you go through kind of a large, I don't even know what to call it, a large canceling, a big social, uh,
Mm.
you know, getting run out of town on a rail or whatever you call it, is you have people who it adds a level of distrust. It certainly did to me, where people that I had really nothing but pleasant interactions with, like have saying like really vicious things or interacting with me in really weird ways, uh, created this kind of distrust oftentimes.
Yeah, and the danger there is um, sometimes we can mistake, or we people that are genuine. I call them gems. Even those people maybe are at a distance when they're the people we should draw close. I found that for me, I did notice my group of friends that I would say with air quotes. A lot of them went away, but then there was this group around me that were dug in, and
Sure.
I mean those are the people I carry with me today.
Yeah, and it is weird. Something I've thought about a lot. I think I might have mentioned uh, to you before, is the idea of there's a huge danger. I think uh, when industry is too tied up with community, where
Hmm.
your value in the community, like your value with your group of peers, if it's tied to your financial success and your celebrity, then I think that muddies the water in really weird ways.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was asking earlier, if it's possible to have both. I mean, I haven't seen it successfully,
I don't
but
think it is. I mean, it's kind of, there's the thing of like, what other option do you have? You can go into the woods, and if you're
yeah,
going to produce, if you're going to be a writer, you're going to need readers.
yeah. I don't know. I don't know. It's funny because I do look back at just even talking to you now. I look back at that time where we were all living here. I didn't even really think of it as comics. It was just kind of the thing that introduced us to each other, which is interesting. That's just my perspective. It wasn't for me really. I guess for me, comics wasn't the thing. It was just maybe an avenue for me to express story.
Yeah, and you were already
But
branching out back then. You were doing the like the D&D videos and things like that.
yeah, I was always kind of trying to find new ways to tell story, which is I still do. So yeah, you've talked just briefly about that you went through. Well, just call it. It was a cancellation, and I was there for it. I remember it happening, and it was basically the industry that you were in turned their back on you, and you. I want to talk about suffering.
Sure.
Those early years. It's been some time, but what was that like, and what were the things that kept you going?
Uh, it's weird because I've talked about it a bit, but it was really like, it was really hopeless in a bizarre way that I did not expect to experience. Because I'd really, the idea of like kind of putting your eggs in one basket, I'd done exactly that, and then the idea of the community that I'd spent my entire life kind of in and working towards was immediately like, uh, yeah, it kind of turned on me, and it was baffling, and I kept thinking that there was like a corrective measure I could do. Like, it was a feeling of like, oh no, you guys misunderstood. Let's just figure this out. And it's one of those weird things where I don't think I've ever had an experience before that took me years to process in such a way. Like I was not okay for about 4 years. I was really not okay. I was like not doing well on a daily basis for for years, which is a bizarre thing. And I was, I was in therapy, and I had some good people around me. Um, at that point, I'd gotten divorced, and I was living with a girlfriend at the time who was like, you know, 23 or 24 or something, and it was like, I'm really grateful for her. Like, we're still friends, but it was such a huge burden to put on somebody else, and it shifted my view of reality so dramatically at the time, and I'm kind of piecing it back together in a lot of ways now because I'm in a much better place. But it really gave me this feeling of like of almost universal distrust of people until I was sure I could trust them. And because there was this like constant like with like something that social media does that I think is really bad is like like even the idea of like if you're friends with someone and they can unfollow you on a platform, just being able to check if you're in, it's like checking if you're in some Duke's good graces or something. And so it's been like hours like scrolling through people of like, oh no, this person that I once had dinner with 3 years ago and I thought we were going along great unfollowed me, you know, and really confusing things where it'd be like people were like, I only had positive interactions with this person and now they have negative feelings about me, and it was yeah, so it was really strange, and I think a lot of things I've had to come to terms with is you just don't get satisfactory answers to some things, and also learning that sometimes communication is not. I don't know, and I think part of it is it messed with my self importance and realizing like, oh, the reality of who I am isn't really important in this situation. It's just a lot of people like protecting themselves and distancing themselves from me.
Did you find you in later years had sympathy for that, or is it something you still struggle with resentment?
I don't think I struggle with resentment, but I don't have sympathy for it. Wherever the middle ground is in that, because it is like it's easy to do, and I understand it. It's like it doesn't hurt my feelings because it's easy to do, but I also do think that it is. I guess I struggle in the way like I've gotten myself in trouble by trying to be publicly kind to people, and that's something that's difficult because there's like at one point I did a pinup for a canceled guy, and it was just like unbelievable how much people were upset at me. Like I had people making YouTube videos about like the problem with me doing this thing, and it was funny because the reality of it was like this guy that I had kind of know for a while, and he'd had some difficulty and everything. He was just like struggling getting back into comics, and he hit me up and was like, "I'm doing a children's comic. Will you do a pinup for it?" And I gave myself a thing of like, if I finish my work tonight, I'll do this pinup before I go to sleep. And if like I'm having perspective problems or something takes an hour longer, this thing wouldn't happen. So I did it, and then like it became this big thing, and I'm definitely aware that I've gotten more guarded. Like if I don't really know someone that well, and it's like a hot button topic thing, I'm not as quick to jump into the fire because I know that like it's not just me. It's like I'm putting my finances and my ability to make money and the people around me who count on me in the way, and I think that that's something to come to terms with. And so I mean that's an aspect of things, right? Like there
Do
is
you
this social
do
pressure.
you worry about, you know, I've talked to a few people that have gone through this, and there's a theme that these people worry that their involvement will damage others. Do you worry about that?
Uh, Probably not enough, but because I do feel like it is one of those things that if more people didn't put up with this sort of thing, then it wouldn't have the teeth it does. And also, I should qualify. Like, I don't think it has the teeth it did. Like, I think we had this window that I think Ed's death hopefully closed in a lot of ways of where it was totally acceptable to just kind of sacrifice someone to social media.
Yeah, and the reason I ask that is because yeah, I think it's more than high time that people stop listening to that and have courage. I think especially after what we saw with Ed Pisker and people I love. it's time for people to actually, I guess, the grown-ups to stand up in the room and say no more.
Yeah, and it doesn't. It kind of hurts everyone in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's a weird phenomenon. Like it's like it is very much just done oftentimes for entertainment under the guise of other things. And I feel like I understand it because I've been on both sides of the thing in a fair amount. I've certainly like reveled in kind of like tearing down people when I was more on social media. And that's
Yeah.
been something to try to and I think through you, I had a conversation with somebody that I helped tear down, and that was a weird situation because I I apologized, but it felt like talking to someone with their arms crossed, you know.
Yeah. I think that's I think that's just what happens with something that's very traumatizing. You mentioned earlier about how your perspective on the world changed. My wife, I think she elegantly talks about trauma in the way that it is you are forced to see the world in a way you didn't believe was true before. So any kind of this is the way the world operates and something happens that makes you realize that you feel you've lied to yourself. It's interesting and I think it's a really elegant way of saying it that yeah, I think that's probably you just described that yourself. You had to accept that your worldview was maybe wrong.
Yeah, my worldview was wrong, and now I'm trying to kind of come to terms with I can't have a hurt worldview either because I had these um, I always think there's in comic books there's this guy Dave Sim who famously at a certain point put out a thing where he got so lambasted for people thinking that he was misogynist that he had people sign a declaration they didn't think he was a misogynist and he would communicate with those people. Um, and it's funny because people joke about that all the time about like what a crazy person move that is, and maybe it is, but I felt like at a certain point, like that was a relatable idea of like
Huh.
sign a paper and I'll talk to you because I felt like I had I really I think prior to being canceled I generally viewed people as what they said they were, and then I had so many experiences where someone would weird experiences where there's a guy that I worked with. Maybe this is worth kind of parsing through. There's a guy I worked with who turned down a job that I ended up taking, and he was really salty about the job in general. I think because it had to do with like crypto things,
Okay.
and and then I took the job, and it's a great job, and the people involved in it treated me really well, and kind of let me be creative and do my work and everything. And at some point, I think somebody told me that he was shit talking me on social media because I don't look at myself anymore. And so I just like I try to be as face to face as possible. So I just texted the guy and I was like, "Hey, what's up? You're talking about me. You can just talk to me, you know."
Hmm.
And it was very weird because he was at a certain point. I started looking at his Twitter and he was tweeting in between us communicating, and he was saying totally different things to me than he was saying online. And it was
Well, yeah, this is I would define that in a clear box of a weak man. I think when, regardless of what your view of, masculinity or being male is, I think an important one, I mean, for all human beings, that your words and actions should align. And the more you can do that, the more you draw like-minded people to you.
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate. I think the thing that confused me is what it brings out in me is I feel like they're creating more problems. Like if somebody is going to not communicate directly with somebody about how they feel about a situation and then put their real feelings out in a public way, I feel like they're creating more problems for themselves. It's like
Yeah.
living in a living room and just taking your trash and throwing it in the kitchen and being like, I can't see it, not my problem. But you're gonna have to go in there.
Yeah, I mean, some people, you said earlier yourself that self-awareness is tough. So imagine people that aren't challenged. And I think probably until both you and I were, our worldviews were challenged in a pretty significant way, we didn't have that self awareness. And I think that's kind of the process of healing and rebuilding, kind of a new worldview that hopefully isn't cynical, that isn't tainted by those bad experiences. I guess my question for you is, how have you done that? How have you started to build things back together in a more healing way?
I mean, a big part of it for me was kind of shrinking my world and focusing on the value of having a good day and not letting things disturb your peace, and how sometimes peace is more important to me than engagement.
Oh yeah, totally. I love it.
That's been a really,
That's my jam.
yeah, it's a nice thing to come to terms with, because it's just like, I've started to regard these days where I'm like, today I went on a walk with my lady, and we went out to a restaurant, and then I got home and I got to draw some fun pictures. What a huge success today was. And um, yeah, and it's just like, it might not be like you're being handed an award on top of the Empire State Building, but you're like, in a lot of ways, it's much more valuable than things that you think of as important in the abstract.
Oh yeah, I love that, and I'm really glad to hear it come from you actually, because I've always really admired you, and it's never, for me, it's never been about the comics. It's about the memories I have of you being in our place and just hanging out and spending time together and bonding as human beings. And so I'm really happy to hear you say that. And the I'm in the same place. You were asking earlier about the podcast, kind of how I think about it. I don't. It's a thing that I knew I had to do, and I've mentioned this even in the show when I'm recording it, that I just know I have to do it. But I just record it and I throw it out into the universe, and I post maybe on my private Instagram. I, if I were to look at the engagement numbers, I wouldn't be doing this. You know what I mean? And I just think it's important because I'm actually processing a lot of this stuff and rebuilding my worldview through it and talking to people like you and hearing your perspectives. And every conversation I've had, I have a moment just like I did now of genuine, like an emotional response.
That's good. Yeah, and it's nice to hear, because I have this impression of myself as too comic focused and kind of trying to build into a person now. And so it's nice that
Mm.
I was, at least to you, that I was felt like a person, because yeah, I did do really value our hangouts in Vancouver um, back in the day.
Well, you'll have to make a trip up here sometime soon.
Yeah, yeah, I'd like to. I feel like, yeah, I feel like I'm leaving some things hanging with the idea of like kind of what else is, because that's a big part of it too, is just, and having like um, a routine is really helpful.
Mm.
Like, um, and uh, some of our friends, and you included, have got kids now, and I feel like that is almost like nature's way of building new routines and new things into your life.
Yeah, totally.
And I've been, I've been, I've been figuring out something I think about a bit is the idea of like, if you see like a 15-year-old, and you take a 15-year-old's clothes and you put those on a 70-year-old, the 70-year-old looks homeless. And so if you emotionally act like you did when you were 20, when you're 40, it's like you look kind of emotionally homeless, like your shit's not together. And so I've been
Wow.
trying to figure out, like, and I'm saying this in a Tintin shirt while I'm talking to you, but I'm trying to figure out how to like ways to become an adult on my own terms. It was
There,
kind of weird.
that's so. It's so funny when we were in Sweden. My wife, she had this shirt that she probably picked up at a comic convention somewhere, and she had this moment where she walked into the room. I think it was a Murder She Wrote shirt or something,
Nice.
and it was just like, one of those gimmick shirts you see at comic conventions, and she just stands. I was in bed, like I just got up, and she's just got this look on her face like she'd been struck by lightning, and she goes. She's like, I'm in my 40s and I'm wearing this shirt. What's wrong with me?
In her defense, no one younger than that would wear a Murder She Wrote shirt. It's funny at this point. I have different clothes that I wear when I'm going outside than when I'm alone in my house.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're right. It's a balance.
Right, because you also don't want to be like, time to put on my tuxedo and go make coffee.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Time and place, right?
Yeah,
Value.
and obviously the clothes analogy is like that. How you present yourself is an aspect, but also
Mm,
just like how you act and how important it is to be a different version of yourself in a different decade.
I like that.
Yeah, and I do think that uh, that's the nice one of the nice things about going through difficult things is sometimes if life is too sweet, then you don't feel the need. Like every day is a pajama party. I feel like that could really stagnate a person.
Yeah. One of the books that I read, and maybe if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
I haven't.
You should check it out. It's really about what we can do with suffering and what humans can endure. Um, he has some really interesting theories about it, but for me, it was really instrumental in understanding the value of it and how it can. I mean, Viktor Frankl went on to be, so he was a Holocaust survivor, and he reflected on his time in the camps. It's incredible stuff, but prepare yourself emotionally for it. But then he went on with his life to write some incredible theories about, yeah, the human condition, suffering, and what we can do with it, and what comes out of it. I genuinely think suffering makes us wiser if we internalize it and weigh it and look at it kind of as you did, with a perspective almost as a outsider looking in.
Yeah, it's interesting. It made me think of kind of my version of that book, because I have it next to my desk here. Is I've got Frederick Douglass's first biography.
Hmm.
I got really. This is just another indication that I'm growing old. Is I've got much more into history, um, and like American history is really fascinating because I feel like I was always an edgy teen that was like, screw this place. And then as soon as I started traveling to other countries and things like that, I'm like, I'm an adult. I have a choice of where I'm living. Like if I have issues with where I'm living, then I have the option to live somewhere else. And
Yeah.
and it's made me really like, like I'm really happy that I'm in like America and in Las Vegas in these senses and everything, and kind of plumbing the depths of it. But kind of in the same vein as you're talking about, like reading Frederick Douglass's biography, and he's a guy that was born into slavery and met his mother like 3 times and remembers getting his first pair of pants. And reading somebody really charming and intelligent talking about the difficulties they went through and made it through, I think really, I mean, it certainly made me, it certainly gave perspective. Like, oh no, you're not going to get a job on Batman because somebody said something about you on Twitter. It's like, yeah, this guy met his mom twice and had to escape slavery. You're fine. You know?
Yeah, well, it is, and I think it's really, that's something I think is really excellent about these people that have gone through it, is that perspective that if they can get through it, we can. But I think also it's important not to minimize the strain and the cost of our own trauma and our own suffering. And I guess to that end, as we're kind of coming to the end here, what in the healing process, and you're working through it, you're doing diary comics, which I think are an excellent way to reflect. Where do you see this ultimate meaning and purpose for Brandon going forward?
uh, I feel like with the diary book and with I did this other book called Rain Like Hammers that was kind of a processing book for me, and I they were both really unpleasant in some ways to make, but therapeutic. Um, and I felt like I reached a point. It might be wishful thinking, but I was like, though I'm going to put those behind me now, and I'm no longer going to do processing depression things, and now I'm kind of willing myself into an era of having fun and enjoying things and like having peace. And so I think
Mm.
I think there's a lot of power and intent. So I've been thinking more of like now it's now it's a time to kind of no longer wallow in things and try to really just like enjoy that I get to be a person on Earth.
It's beautiful, and I love hearing that from you.
Yeah, I mean, fingers crossed, right? But it
Well,
is,
I mean, it's good intent. It doesn't mean you're not going to have bumps along the way, but you probably have the support systems, the loved ones around you, and a better view of who you are, which is going to help with all those future obstacles.
yeah, yeah. It's nice to be able, like I said earlier, it's nice to go through difficult times and know, like, oh, I can figure this out. Like I know so many people that have um, have difficulties in their careers and kind of don't know what to do next or in their life and everything. And having gone through a situation where you feel like you've lost everything is and then building it back up really. I mean, obviously, I'm very aware too that like at 47, I have different metrics for what I'm capable of than I mean, I like when you're 20, the world treats you very differently than you're in your 40s. Um, both positive
What
and
do you
negative.
what do you prefer?
I mean, I think it's so much better to be younger and how the world treats you. And like, I think that there's a invisibleness. I think that happens in becoming like a middle-aged man, which is nice in some ways, but it is also like um, fascinating because I talked earlier about being in situations where I was felt like I was like always got like kind of VIP treatment. It's very funny to be in situations um, where where you meet someone and they introduce themselves to you that they're like have no memory of you after, even if you talked to them for like an hour a week ago. It's just like, all right, I'm clearly not very important to you, so live your life.
Well, that's the humbling experience of getting old, I guess, Brandon.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, it is kind of in the same way I talked about kind of the bartender idea earlier. There's a joy in getting to experience all these things,
Yeah.
like we get to see what it's like to something my partner Casey always says about she always quotes the Hunter S. Thompson buy the ticket, take the ride, and I think that that's a nice view of life. Like you get to like seeing it as that.
I love that. I think that's an excellent way to lead into the last question, which is, what does legacy mean to you, Brandon?
uh, I mean, I think I have different view of it than a lot of our friends, just in the idea that I have a deep connection to a lot of people's work that I've never met, and I suspect at this point in my life I will not have children, so it is. Um, I like the idea of creating artwork that is trying to um, share what it's like to be a person and kind of communicate the human experience, and then the idea that someone you'll never meet can find that, and it can. I think about the books that I have that are really important to me, and how it doesn't matter that I never met those people because I got such a good idea of their views and their life through their work, and I think that's the closest uh, that I'm kind of aiming for. Is hopefully people that I don't meet can engage with things I've left behind in a way, but also I might have gotten to the point where I feel like on my day to day legacy is less important than um, experience, and I've started to also view me producing things and me engaging with people as a really good excuse to have experiences.
Yeah, and I would say the world is richer for having you in it and opening yourself up to people. I definitely feel that way.
Yeah, hopefully, but it's always there's so much we deal with so much abstract in making anything, and I suppose the same thing is like you could meet someone and have a really pleasant conversation with them, and you don't know their side of it. You could just kind of know yours. My partner Casey talks a lot often about this idea of like a lot of her ideas about life are the idea that we're get to experience all these things, and that hopefully we will have a kind of empathy of the human race at a certain point where we get to experience in some afterlife how other people experience things, and get like a true empathy of like If you were difficult to someone in their life, to understand how they experience something. It's something that's helped me with my empathy for people. Is someone will do something, and I'll think to myself, like, if I was them, I would have done the same thing, for good or ill.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, and I think the more we can strive for that in our time here on earth, whatever you might think about the afterlife, I think at least on a personal level we'll be happier, and the world will be just a little bit better of a place, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's a longhand version of saying like treating other people how you want to be treated, or at least realizing that they're people and that you can engage with them, or the abstract idea of treating people as if you will be those people someday.
Exactly. Exactly. We're all going to stumble and fall. Brandon, thank you so much for coming on today. This has been awesome, and I do hope you come up here sometime soon
Yeah, certainly.
and get to hang out in person sometime. But until then, man, yeah, I continue continued success on your journey forward.
Thanks, Curtis. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate you, brother.
You as well.
Thank you so much.